As the first light of morning rises, the dew begins to sparkle. Each tiny droplet glistens at the edge of a leaf, reflecting the whole world within it. We see them as ordinary drops of water, but in truth, each one hides an entirely different world, an invisible universe. Inside that universe, creatures live, eat, move, and reproduce, beings millions of times smaller than us. And among them is one of nature's greatest miracles, the water bear. Despite its microscopic size, it defies every rule of life with its incredible strength to survive. The story of this tiny hero begins here, inside this single drop of water. The adorable little creature you're seeing is called a tardigrade. The word tardigrade comes from Latin, meaning slow walker. In 1773, German zoologist Johann August Ephraim Goes observed this tiny being under a microscope for the first time. He thought it looked like a little bear, and that's how it earned its nickname, the water bear. He might not have realized it at that moment, but he had just discovered one of the most mysterious creatures in all of nature. The tardigrade is an incredibly tiny creature. Most of them are about 0.5 millimeter long. Even the largest ones barely reach 1.5 millimeters. That means they're smaller than a single grain of sand. Their bodies are shaped like little cylinders, made up of 4 main segments. Each segment has a pair of legs, 8 in total. And at the tip of every leg, there are tiny claws, sometimes 4, sometimes 8, depending on the species. It might surprise you, but some species even have simple eyes. They may be microscopic, but when you look closely, you realize these little beings are astonishingly complex. Tardigrades are believed to have existed for around 500 million years. That means they were here long before the dinosaurs, even before the very first plants appeared on land. Back then, there was no life on land, but the oceans were already full of microscopic life. And in that invisible world, tardigrades were part of the food chain, feeding on algae and bacteria. Today, scientists have identified more than 1,300 species of tardigrades, and each one has evolved to survive in a completely different environment. Some live frozen in the ice of the polar regions. Others hide among the leaves of tropical forests. Some even thrive in cities, in moss growing on rooftops or at the damp cracks of concrete walls. In short, wherever there's a bit of moisture, there might just be a tardigrade living there. Tardigrades have no lungs, no gills. In fact, they don't even breathe. At least, not in the way we do. They absorb oxygen directly through their body surface and release carbon dioxide the same way. It's a simple system, but perfectly suited to their microscopic size. Life, for them, is a quiet exchange that happens deep within their cells. They really do look adorable, don't they? But what makes these little creatures truly remarkable isn't their cuteness. It's their resilience. They are, quite literally, the toughest animals known to science, capable of surviving conditions that would kill almost any other form of life. You could boil them in water, and they would still survive, up to 150 degrees Celsius. Freeze them down to minus 272 degrees Celsius, and they wouldn't die either. Do you know what that means? The lowest possible temperature in the universe, known as absolute zero, is minus 273.15 degrees Celsius. In other words, tardigrades can survive just 1 degree above the coldest limit of existence itself, and it doesn't end there. They can withstand intense radiation, crushing pressure, and even toxic chemicals. It's a level of endurance that seems almost impossible. In 2007, as part of a special experiment conducted with the International Space Station, about 3,000 water bears were sent into low Earth orbit inside a small capsule. For 12 days, these tiny creatures were directly exposed to the vacuum of space. No air, no protection. They endured extreme heat, freezing cold, and deadly cosmic radiation. When the capsule returned to Earth, scientists were stunned by the results. 68% of the tardigrades were still alive. And not only did they survive, they continued to lay eggs and reproduce normally. They became the first, and so far the only, known animals to survive the lethal conditions of space without any protective suit. How is this even possible? How can such a tiny creature survive what seems utterly impossible? Tardigrades, just like the bears they're named after, go into a kind of hibernation. When they sense danger or extreme conditions, they enter a state called TUN, a form of cryptobiosis. Suspended life. They harden their bodies and curl into a dry, protective capsule. In this state, they lose nearly all their water, shrink to a fraction of their size, and can remain that way for years, even decades, without food or water. Their hearts stop. They don't breathe, but they aren't dead, just waiting. Scientists call this suspended animation, a living pause where time itself seems to stop. Then, when the environment becomes favorable again, they simply rehydrate and come back to life. The hard shell softens, the body absorbs water, and those tiny legs begin to move once more. In the silent glaciers of Antarctica, researchers once found a tardigrade of the species Acutuncus antarcticus, preserved in a moss sample collected in 1983. It had been frozen at -20 degrees Celsius for more than 30 years. When scientists thawed the sample in 2014, something extraordinary happened. The tardigrade came back to life. It moved, it fed, and even laid eggs that later hatched. It set a world record for surviving the longest time in a frozen state. Further analysis showed that during those decades of freezing, its metabolism had completely stopped, meaning it hadn't aged at all. Tardigrades aren't just tough little creatures. They've also captured scientists' attention for another reason: their surprisingly sophisticated nervous systems and behavior. Inside their tiny bodies lies a simple yet incredibly efficient neural network. It controls their movements, their feeding, and their response to the world around them. Because of this, tardigrades are studied as model organisms, small living systems that help scientists understand the bigger picture of how life works. In such a microscopic body, nature has engineered a nervous system that manages life with stunning precision, offering a glimpse into the brilliance of evolution itself. But tardigrades don't just adapt to their environment. They can actually absorb genetic material from it. In other words, they can take fragments of DNA from other organisms and incorporate them into their own. This rare phenomenon is known as horizontal gene transfer, something we usually see in bacteria, not in animals. By borrowing genes from other species, tardigrades have turned themselves into biological superorganisms, capable of repairing damage, adapting, and surviving in ways few others can. Scientists believe this ability could one day help us too. by teaching us how to engineer more resilient genes, or even how to slow down the aging process itself. When exposed to radiation, tardigrades produce a special protein called DS-UP, short for damage suppressor. This protein wraps around their DNA like a protective shield, preventing it from breaking apart. DS-UP is especially found in a species called Rhamazoteuus viriornatus, and it protects DNA not only from radiation, but also from harmful oxygen molecules, the same reactive chemicals that slowly rust our own cells. In 2016, scientists performed an astonishing experiment. They transferred the tardigrade's DS-UP protein into human cells. The result was incredible. When exposed to X-rays, DNA damage in those cells was reduced by about 40%. This discovery opened a new possibility, that one day we might use the same mechanism to make human cells more resistant to radiation, or even to reduce the side effects of cancer treatments. But scientists are not just studying tardigrades anymore. They're starting to use them. In one experiment, researchers created microscopic tattoos on living tardigrades. These tattoos weren't for decoration. They were actually nanoscale devices. The goal was to test whether living, resilient organisms like tardigrades could serve as biological platforms for future medical and biotechnological systems. Researcher Ding Zhao explained that this technique isn't limited to tardigrades. We can apply it to other organisms as well, even bacteria, embedding microscopic structures inside living cells. Nature's toughest creature is now inspiring some of science's smallest technologies. If they succeed, it could mark the beginning of an entirely new era in medicine and bioengineering. In this experiment, scientists used a technique called ice lithography. First, they triggered the tardigrade's own defense mechanism, inducing a cryptobiotic tune state. Then they placed the tiny creature on a carbon-based surface and cooled it down to -143 degrees Celsius. Next, they covered it with a thin layer of a protective substance, an organic liquid called anisole, known for its faintly sweet scent. Once frozen, the anisole formed a delicate, icy coating over the tardigrade's body. Using a focused electron beam, the researchers etched microscopic patterns into the frozen layer. The beam reacted with the ice, leaving behind a permanent, biocompatible mark directly on the tardigrade's surface. As the tardigrade slowly warmed back to room temperature, the frozen layer sublimated into vapor, and the tiny etched design remained imprinted on its living body. Finally, they rehydrated the tardigrade, and it came back to life, now carrying what scientists called a micro-tattoo. But think about it. When a creature can survive freezing, radiation, and even the vacuum of space, is there really a better candidate for experiments like these than the tardigrade? The precision of this new technique was astonishing. Researchers were able to etch microscopic patterns directly onto the tardigrade's bodies. Tiny squares, dots, and lines only 72 nanometers wide, even the logo of their university. About 40% of the tardigrades survived the process, and scientists believe they can increase that rate as the method improves. But here's the most fascinating part. Once rehydrated and brought back to life, the tardigrades showed absolutely no change in behavior. It was as if the micro-tattoos didn't bother them at all. These results could open entirely new pathways for embedding microscopic sensors or electronic circuits into living tissues. Researcher Gavin King, who was not involved in the study, commented, "Shaping living matter with such precision is an enormous challenge." This breakthrough suggests that the kind of biotechnological devices we once saw only in science fiction films may soon become real. The research team remains optimistic. Thanks to this technique, it may one day be possible to build intelligent devices that work alongside microscopic life, and to create new biotechnological systems that could help improve human health. But what if tardigrades can survive the extreme conditions of space? Could it be that they're not entirely from Earth? Evolutionarily, they don't quite fit in with other life forms. Their genetic structure contains fragments from other species, and they defy many of the rules we thought defined life itself. This idea isn't new. In the 5th century BCE, the Greek philosopher Anaxagoras proposed that the seeds of life might have come from the cosmos. This concept is known as Panspermia, the hypothesis that microscopic seeds of life could travel across the universe, carried by stardust and meteorites, spreading life from one world to another. The scientific community remains cautious about it, but it does make you wonder. Maybe, somewhere out there, in the vast depths of the universe, another civilization has already discovered these tiny beings. And who knows, perhaps it was they who once sent them here, to our little blue planet. Tardigrade, perhaps the oldest traveler in the universe.